So welcome to the Mendelian Genetics Basics lecture. We're just going to do a quick review over the Mendelian genetics before we move on to our activity today. So first, what is genetics? Genetics is a study of how traits are passed from parent to offspring. So whether that's a trait of having dimples or a trait of having just a little dimple in your chin, things like that. Hair color, eye color, it's the study of how traits are passed from your parents to you or from parent to offspring. Whether that's you can roll your tongue, curly hair, straight hair, the color of your hair, all of those are traits that can be passed down. Now, there is a scientist called Gregor Mendel. He's known as the father of genetics, as he did a lot of research and really kind of figured out how genetics worked first. And he has two laws that we're going to learn about. The first is principle of independent assortment, and the second one is principle of segregation. So the principle of independent assortment says that genes can separate independently during the formation of gametes, and that the inheritance of one trait has no effect on the inheritance of another. So an example is hair color and eye color are going to independently assort. So not all people that have blonde hair are going to have blue eyes, or not all people that have brown hair is going to have brown eyes, because those genes are independently assorted during meiosis. So they are not going to be grouped together when you're inheriting genes. And then the law of segregation, the principle of segregation, it states that two alleles coding for the same trait separate or segregate during gamete formation. So if your mom has these two alleles, a capital T, a dominant, and a recessive T, when she goes through meiosis and you end up with half of the DNA in her gametes, her egg cells, she's going to independently assort big T's in some of her cells and little T's in the other cells. They're not going to be both of those within the egg, because you end up splitting those chromatids apart. Same with the dad. If he has a dominant T and a recessive T, it's going to end up splitting during meiosis to where half of them, the big T's are going to go in one and the little T's are going to go in the other. And so you have that principle of segregation. Some just basic genetics vocab. Chromosomes are made up of DNA. Genes are a segment within that chromosome or on that DNA that determines a specific trait, which you know codes for a protein. And then homologous chromosomes are the pairs of chromosomes that code for the same traits, one from your mom and one from your dad. So it's not going to have the exact same code, it's just going to be the same type of trait, whether that's hair color, eye color, dimple, chin, things like that. Alleles, once again, are different genes or possibilities for the same trait. So you have two chromatids, one from mom, one from dad. This one could be an eye color for blue eyes, this one could be an eye color for brown eyes. The two different possibilities, brown versus blue, are going to be the two different alleles. The dominant allele is a gene that covers up the other gene, so it's the one that dominates the other. We use uppercase letters to show those. Recessive alleles are the genes that don't show through unless there's two of them because they're overpowered, and so that's the lowercase t. So then whenever you end up seeing it, the dominant color here would be this one that overpowers, and then only when there's two lowercase recessive alleles are you going to see the recessive color or trait shown. So here's an example. Straight thumb is dominant to a hitchhiker thumb. So straight thumb is a capital T, while hitchhiker's thumb is a lowercase t. So if you have two capital T's or even a capital T and a lowercase t, you're going to end up with a straight thumb because that dominant trait is going to overpower the lowercase t here. And you're only going to see hitchhiker's thumb if you have two recessive alleles, because you end up with only that allele. It's not going to be dominated over by a dominant. Once again, you must have two recessive alleles for a recessive trait to physically show. Genotype is the genetic makeup of an organism, or the combination of those genes. So it's going to be the letters that we use. So whether you're homozygous dominant with two dominant traits, heterozygous with a dominant and a recessive, or two recessive traits here, you're going to depict those with letters. While phenotype is the physical appearance or characteristics that you're seeing from that gene. So whether that's your eye color, your hair color, the hitchhiker thumb versus the straight thumb, it's what you're physically seeing on the outside. Homozygous or purebred is where both genes from a pair are the same. So it's whether If they're both dominant, they'll be homozygous dominant. If they're both recessive, they'll be homozygous recessive. Now, if they're different, then they're considered heterozygous, or hybrids. That's one dominant and one recessive gene. So for this first genotype, this is going to be homozygous dominant, which is black, shows the black phenotype. This one in the center here is going to be heterozygous. That's going to be a black allele with a white allele, but it's going to overpower and end up with a black dog. This one's heterozygous. This one down here is homozygous recessive, right? Two the same. And since they're both recessive, you're going to end up with the white phenotype. Next, we're going to talk about generations. You end up talking about different generations based on the offspring. So the parental generation is going to be the initial generation that we're talking about when we do our first cross. So the first set of parents is going to be the parental. Then the F1 generation is going to be the parent's offspring. So these parents getting together and having an offspring, that's going to be the F1 generation. And then the F2 generation is going to be the offspring of the offspring. And so whatever this offspring fertilizes with, it's saying that this one's self-fertilizing, but if it had another flower here to fertilize with it, then the offspring of this organism, so these down here, are going to be considered F2. So let's just go through here. Punnett squares and probability. The purpose is to predict possible genetic makeup of an offspring. The monohybrid crosses are crossing just one trait at a time. So let's just practice one of them. Black fur is dominant to white fur in mice. The parents are this. So the first step you're going to do is that step A, find the alleles. So you're going to say capital B is black fur, lowercase b is white fur. The next step would be find the parental generation, that P step. So you already have the parents here, I've given them to you. The next step is the Punnett square. So you're going to put one parent on top, one parent on the side. You're going to end up dropping down each of these alleles and then pulling across each of these alleles to fill out the Punnett square. And then the last step is solution. This one I don't ask you a specific solution question, and so you don't have to worry about that. Then monohybrid cross 2. In pea plants, the allele that causes seeds to be smooth is dominant to the allele that causes seeds to be wrinkled. If two hybrid smooth pea plants are crossed, then what percentage of the offspring will be wrinkled? So the first step is the A alleles, designating which one's dominant and which one's recessive. And so the dominant allele is smooth. We use a capital B for that. The recessive allele is wrinkled, so I'm going to use a lowercase b for that. Next, you're going to find the parental genotypes. The parents are two hybrids. Hybrids are a mixture of both alleles, so you're going to have a capital and a lowercase for each of those parents. So you're going to have the parents capital B lowercase b, capital B lowercase b. The next step would be completing the Punnett square for the second P. So I'm going to drop these down, pull them across, and then the last step is the solution. What am I answering the question? What question am I answering? So the question here is what percentage of the offspring will be wrinkled? So you're going to look here. These are all dominant traits, right? Because you have a dominant gene in each of these, so those are going to be smooth. This is the only one that's going to be wrinkled because it's homozygous recessive. It only has itself, so it won't be dominated over. And so one box out of the 4 is 25% wrinkled. Okay. That is all. We're going to go ahead and move on to our dog assignment. So go ahead to the dog assignment in Canvas and complete the dog assignment.